Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Integrated Man Project podcast. Before we jump into this week's episode, I did want to share about an exclusive membership I'm going to be launching to help shape the Integrated Man Project community. If this is something you'd be interested in, where you will be co-laboring with me, sharing your ideas, giving input, giving me feedback, part of kind of this process of creating something bigger and better for all men, I would love for you to join. And if this is something you're interested, please reach out to me. Email me at integratedmanproject@gmail.com. You could also send me a direct message on Instagram as well, or on LinkedIn. I would love for you to reach out to me. I would love for you to be part of this exclusive group to help, again, shape and form this Integrated Man community. Because as you do this, as we share in this journey together, we're going to create a community of men around the world where we become more grounded, more adaptable, more resilient, and more authentic men. So come on and join. If you're interested in this, please reach out to me. And without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Integrated Man Project podcast. I'm excited to have this guest on this morning, and I'm gonna have him say hi, intro himself, and it's Daniel. So Daniel, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. I know it's earlier for you. It seems early to me, though. So I appreciate you taking the time this early in the morning to hop on. That's some real sacrifice
Yeah.
right there. But yeah, so we're 2 hours difference. I'm in the good old South United States. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. And as you said, my name is Daniel. So I'm married to Rachel. We've been married for 15 years. So we have 4 kids, and they kind of span the gamut. They're all boys. But our youngest is 1, and then we have a 6, 8, and 12-year-old. He'll be 12 in a couple of weeks, and they are a high energy pack of kids. And we like it that way. We want them to be full of energy and to live their best life. But yeah, I think, Travis, me and you connected on Instagram when you and Dads Don't Babysit, Nate, had a reel one time about just calling another guy up when you're going through something hard and like legitimately sharing that and caring about each other. And so I started checking out your page. But yeah, I have Honest Fatherhood is my Instagram page. So I've been trying to share things that I wish someone had told me when I got married and before I had kids with the social media world. So I'm 40. I haven't done everything well or right, but I've definitely made some mistakes that I would like to tell people about my mistakes, so maybe they don't have to walk through those same valleys that I did. So that's kind of my backstory.
And I'm glad we connected, and that was something that with Nate, and Nate's a great guy. Dads Don't Babysit. If you're listening, good morning. And those that don't know his account, like, great guy. And yeah, that was a fun reel. It was an idea I had. With that actually was pitching it to him, saying, hey, what if we just modeled and showed kind of healthy, men vulnerability kind of connection, and just modeled a call that we might do. And we did a few of them just to kind of show that of, here's actually what we kind of need, and here's what it would look like if you wanted to call a buddy, and maybe do something a little deeper than just kind of keeping surfacey. Because again, like, to your point, is what was modeled to us, and how do we kind of talk through things and provide education and growth of things we actually need. But if we don't have a roadmap, how do we do that? How do we navigate this thing of fatherhood or manhood, masculinity, all the, what does it mean to have emotional intelligence, all this stuff. And kind of what you're doing is, trying to answer some of the questions or having some conversations around some stuff that you might have needed that wasn't talked about growing up. And that's when I saw your page too. I was like, oh, this is, it's like another Nate, but it's like Nate 2.0, but I still like Nate. Nate's 1.0, so it's all good, Nate. You're still my friend. Daniel's 2.0. But so important to what I liked about your account was just another honest guy just having these conversations and not having it all figured out. And to that point, I also don't have it all figured out. Sure, I have letters behind my name that say I'm a licensed therapist or coach, but I'm still, at the end of the day, a dad, a man who has his own stuff too. And I just happen to go to school to try to better myself through that way and understand the science behind it. But it doesn't mean that I'm any better or farther along than anyone else. So, I mean, quick thing. Every now and then I could have that imposter syndrome, thing is like, well, I should know these things. I should be better. That's sometimes the voice that gets in my head, when that tries to creep in when I'm not my best, kind of like the reel that you shared this morning or yesterday about, maybe raising your voice with your kid and getting to
Yeah.
that point of that breaking point of, I also get to that point. And, I could get in my head and have in the past of, hey, dude, you know this, you're the one teaching, you're a therapist, you went to school for this. And I've gotten better at kind of not believing that kind of lie in my head, not like buying into that shame. But it challenged me to be better. So all to say, like, I'm so glad that we connected. I think I love what you're doing. I love what Nate's doing and other guys. I think it's such a needed thing to kind of be a model out there, kind of showing this rawness and growth and process. Because it really is, I think, also modeling what healthy, positive masculinity, showing courage, showing strength, bravery, all these things to kind of say, hey, I don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. But I'm on this journey to kind of better myself, and I think such a needed thing in our social media world. So I'm stoked. I think keep doing what you're doing. So with that said, for today's topic, I think following the intro is really this idea of which we just talked about, healing from and growing from kind of how we were raised and the importance of that as we kind of come as men. I'll be 40 in just a few days actually, so I'll be joining you, which is a weird thought, a kind of surreal thought. If I think about it, I'm thinking back to my childhood. I'm like, man, I remember when 20 sounded old and 40, I'm like, that sounded ancient. And so
Yeah,
I'm,
it
I'm
did.
hitting 40 and I don't feel that old. And so it's kind of the importance of healing, growing, changing, and not only for us, but for the next generation. So that's kind of where we're going today. And so with that said, why are you on this journey? Why do you think it's important to grow and heal from your past? And why should that or does that matter to the next generation?
All right, that's a heavy question to start out with in the morning. So I will maybe
I
give
had my
the
coffee, so
yeah,
I'm good.
maybe I'll give a brief bit of context because um, I had these different kinds of trauma and wounds that came from my past, which I think
Mm,
every man does to an extent, even those that had
mm,
present and intentional and thoughtful fathers. Like my kids are probably going to have some kind of thing, nuance or insecurity
sure,
that came from me, even if it's not major trauma. But we all kind of have
mm,
to work through our parents' imperfections in raising us. So when I became a husband and then a father, I started seeing things sabotage my marriage, my fatherhood. And, I was young and naive and untested when I was 26. Right. And I
mm,
thought, I'm going to love my wife perfectly. She's going to feel so loved and valued and seen. She's just, I'm going to have this perfect relationship with her. And then I'm never going to yell. I'm never going to get frustrated with my kids. They're always going to think of dad as, this calm man of endless patience and integrity. And
mm,
when I started not being those things and what I would call like failing at them, I either had to figure out, do I blame my wife, my work situation, my kids? Do I blame everybody else? Or do I look inside and like, why am I yelling? Why am I getting defensive at my wife for certain things? What's going on with me? And I could really trace it back pretty directly to things I went through growing up and
mm,
defense mechanisms I had and insecurities and fears I had based in childhood. So it was
mm,
necessary to address those things, right? Going back, kind of the quick backstory, my mom was married to a guy named Cecil, and that's my biological father. And they were married until I was until I was 4.
mm,
Even then, I called him Cecil. I never called him dad. He just wasn't around that much. He was an addict. He also had multiple affairs and different things like that. So my mom, when I was 4, decided, I don't want this to be the man who raises my son. So she got a divorce. And then she remarried my stepfather when I was 5 years old. And he came in like this knight in shining armor, just this wonderful man. He was a fireman. He was tough. He
mm,
had newly become a Christian and he was kind of on fire for God and doing all these right things and being a good, loving man. So he would like work with us and he would wrestle with us. And I took to him immediately, like just gave him
mm,
my love and affection without hesitation. Kids are
mm.
really good at that. They don't have
Yeah,
our adult defense mechanisms, which is like
right.
prove you're trustworthy. If a kid sees you and they like you, like they just give you all their affection. So I did that with him. And for years, I didn't really know anything was wrong, even though I had divorced parents. I still loved Cecil. thought he
Mm,
was Superman. I think he functioned maybe a little more like a close uncle or something, because he didn't do the dad stuff, like the disciplining and the raising, but he did fun stuff with me. Like he'd buy Ninja
mm,
Turtle toys or let me play Nintendo, or the old version of Screen Time. And he took me hunting with him. And
yeah.
the only present he ever bought me was my first rifle. Every man in my family was a hunter. That was like a rite of passage for us. So I loved him. And Cecil was really charismatic. Like I felt like anytime we were at a group gathering, people oriented themselves around him. And
Mm,
if you know much about addicts, a lot of times they are that way. Like, and
yeah.
maybe it's because of the upper that they're on, but they're fun to be around when they're high or when they're in their, moment. So for a long time, like I went back and forth every other weekend to my grandmother's house where Cecil lived because he lived with his mom. And then I was at my house during the weeks with my mom and stepdad. And things were all good. Around the time I was 10 years old, well, actually, spring break when I was in fourth grade, a thing happened. And it was the first bit of trauma in my life. So I hadn't been to see Cecil in a few months and didn't know why and missed him and wanted to go see him. Now I know that my grandmother did not want me to see him in his state. He had
Mm,
devolved. There was a lot of stuff going on with him and the woman he was seeing at the time. And my dad called me in from playing. So when I say dad, I am referring to my stepdad, not just for confusion. I always call Cecil Cecil.
mm,
So my dad called me in and sat me on the couch and he said, "Son, I need you to sit down. There's something I have to tell you." And he had this tone of voice that I did not know or recognize in him. And
mm,
he just let it out. And he goes, Cecil has shot his girlfriend and he's on the run from the police. And we need you to come inside. We're afraid that he might come and try to get you. And that was the closest thing I've ever had to an out of body experience. My 10-year-old brain could not process the words he had just told me. And it was
mm,
this weird confluence of denial and shock and emotion just welling up like in my
mm,
chest, like it hurt. And it was probably close to shock or almost like a panic attack. Like I started feeling waves going down my body and I just didn't know what to do with it. So I
yeah.
stood up. I wanted to go to my room and, process my emotions in private. I made it about 5 steps and just collapsed on the floor in
Mm,
tears. And, you know, my stepdad held me at the time and we worked through it. And over the next couple of weeks, my mom did take me. We went and stayed with some friends for a while. And I just went in and out of tears trying to process this thing that felt like a movie. Like, how could
mm,
Cecil, my Superman, like my fun dad, like, how could he have done this? Like,
mm,
I couldn't get it. Um, Over time, I eventually did. A week later, did end up getting arrested and served a life sentence in prison
mm,
for first degree murder. And he passed away about 4 years ago um,
mm,
in prison. He died of cancer there. So that was the first moment of trauma. And in that moment, it did something interesting. It instantly made me feel alone and separate from everybody else. Not that my friends didn't have trauma going on. It's just that I didn't know that. And I went to school and it was like, how am I supposed to go back and do spelling test and kick balls around at recess when,
yeah.
Cecil is on the run from the police and I have this huge unsettled trauma going on in my life. And my friends' dads were like soccer coaches and pilots and, all these reputable things. And I'm like,
Mm,
I'm different. And I felt like an outsider looking in now. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. Didn't feel like I
mm,
could talk to anyone about it. That's a lot of weight for a 10-year-old to carry. My parents had never been through anything like that. They didn't necessarily know how do you help a 10-year-old process this kind of
mm,
thing. So I kind of just kept going with this unhealed wound. And about that same time, I didn't know it, but not had an injury where he cut his arm and was prescribed some pain medicine. And he had used drugs before. And that situation kicked off his drug addiction at that point. So at the same time, when I lost my biological father, he went to prison. My stepdad started using drugs. And by the time I was 11 or
mm,
12, he was full blown in the throes of addiction. Um, he's also bipolar. He took different medications for it, none that ever seemed to work. He took Prozac, Wellbutrin, all kinds of things. But when his addiction to drugs and his mental struggles collided, made for a very
mm,
angry, volatile, and rageful person. So like all the
mm,
stuff I talked about this morning on the reel of when your kids get frustrated and you are out of patience
Yeah.
and you yell at them. With him, it was much more, there was much more rage and much
Mm.
less any kind of temperance over anything. So he ruled by dominance and fear. And for the next 10 years of my life, we lived in chaos and fear. Like he would
Mm.
break everything in the house. He would cuss my mom out. He would cuss us out. And, I wasn't abused in this like close fisted punch you kind of a way. It was more like if someone's going to spank you, it's like throwing you on the ground and,
Yeah.
pushing you or like slapping you. And it's that kind of a thing. So we just stayed away from him as
Yeah.
often as we could. And there was often these points where it climaxed into like a big event.
Mhm.
So something, and then we would leave. And then after a
Right.
couple of weeks, he'd promise to go to rehab. He'd promise he'd get better,
Mm.
and then he'd come back.
Yeah.
He was different than Cecil. He, I feel like, had a good heart and was a very kind, loving person, whereas Cecil was really just a narcissist. Not was really kind of a victim to his addiction. Like he did choose to do drugs, but in many ways, he did want to get out of it. Remember when I was like 14 one night, he came into my room and he said, son, I want what he says, I don't even want to get better. It's like, I just want to die. Like I'm done with it.
Mm.
Will you pray for me that I could even want to have the desire to try to get better? Because for him, he just felt like it was over, um,
Yeah.
which is a big weight also for a 14-year-old to carry. Looking back
Yeah.
on it now that I have
Yeah.
kids. And by the time I was 18, his addiction had got to the place where he was just completely medicated. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just
Mm.
comatose, just a zombie on the couch, always out of it.
Mm.
And I moved out around the time I was 21, which was a hard thing. I thought I had to be there to hold the family together. And when I
Mm.
realized at some point, like I couldn't do it and I was really unhappy and I was going to college and working two jobs and I was burned out, I moved to Los Angeles, California. And it was, I don't know if this was the cause of this, but 6 months later, my mom left him and told him she was gone for good. And he ended up going
Mm.
to rehab for 12 months after that. And then that was the beginning of his getting off of drugs at that time. So it has been a hard journey since then. There's been a lot of up and downs and some relapses, but he is clean today. We have a
Mm.
strained, but we do have a relationship.
Mm.
Um, so I'm sorry. I know I said I was going to give you the short version. It's hard to make that short. Um,
Yeah. Well, and it's okay. I mean, there's no need to be sorry for that. And I appreciate just you sharing and giving context. And yeah, I mean, so many things that as you were talking, that were hitting me and thinking of, you know, the little version of you. And you're right, like at 10, hearing about your dad and
yeah.
just the overwhelm of like inability to fully process and comprehend and this outer body experience. What that sounds to me is absolutely a trauma response of kind of, it's surpassing, exceeding your capacity to cope. It's overwhelming your nervous system to have this outer body experience where it's too much to process. So it kind of causes this like disintegration of like, and then you can't, there's this like disconnect, which is completely trauma. And that would be, those listening. I mean, I know trauma is a word that gets used out there on the interwebs and social media, but that would be considered a capital T trauma, meaning it's like this single incident, it's very severe, life threatening kind of an incident that is more traditional. What we think of trauma, of a traumatic incident, is this just this kind of this thing that's just so much like going to war or physical assault, sexual assault, or in this case, this kind of hearing about your dad shooting his girlfriend
Mhm.
and as a kid. It's so overwhelming. And then going to school, like you said, trying to, how do I go back to, and even at 10 thinking, how do I go back to school and play in the playground, but I have this weight of this happening. But something I also did hear, even though your stepdad later really got stuck not too long after, but in that moment, it sounds like he was very present with you too. So he had this moment where he was engaged with you and kind of sounds like very a calming presence at that time. I mean, that's what I was hearing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like he was very like with you and present and not in the throes of addiction or angry, but really kind of like
Yeah.
calming, right? I mean, that's safe in a sense. I mean, that's the sense I was getting, but please correct me if I'm wrong. That's what it sounded like, at least.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. I have two little brothers. My stepbrother from my stepdad's previous marriage is 3.5 years younger than
Mm.
me. And then my half brother is 8 years younger than me. The first 5 years of Knott's marriage to my mom, he was such a good man. In many ways, what I
Mm,
consider to be like the ideal father. That has really helped me in my adult years empathize. And I would even say, like, it's aided in the process of forgiving him from a lot of those
mm,
things. I think I've seen my brothers struggle with it more because they don't have as many memories of the man that
uh,
he was
yeah,
before drugs came into the scene.
gotcha.
And
Sure.
my 8 year old brother, or sorry, my 8 year younger brother has a very drastically different life than I do. He's in a rehab right now. He's 32 and has been
Mm,
an addict since he started when he was 14, but a full blown addict. His first rehab was when he was 17
wow.
because he never had presence, and I think that's been harder. That was has been a factor in his life.
Sure, and that would make sense, yeah, absolutely. You had this foundation of a where he was not stuck in the throes of addiction and he was present, and you like you said, that does make sense. Really a positive foundation. And then you said to yourself, it gives you this capacity to have more empathy and forgiveness because you saw the before and after of what the negative impact of drugs can do and what happens when someone gets stuck in their nervous system, how it can really change them pretty horrendously. And but you 8 years younger, your brother probably only really had memories of that, and that makes sense why you could have the same family, different experiences. And something else I was thinking of is like those that are listening is this like notion of what we call little t trauma, and that's kind of not so much like you were saying. It wasn't life threatening. It wasn't physical assault, sexual assault, but it was more of the later on when he was in the throes of addiction is more of that chronic, ongoing stress in the home with his anger and the fear that can cause overwhelming the body too, of shutting down, of anxiety, of stress, and this kind of constant state of tension. And this is well documented by all the main researchers of trauma like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Dan Siegel, Stephen Porges. These are all guys and men that have researched trauma on the body, and even Peter Levine and them would say, hey, it's really anything that's overwhelming the body's again nervous system to effectively integrate and manage and navigate, especially chronically daily, is like you're in a way it's kind of like being in a battlefield to some degree, right? You're constantly in this state, like, is dad gonna yell, is he gonna get upset, I don't know. So you're kind of walking on eggshells, and then at any minute things could like take off, and so you're constantly in this edged state, and it might look like anxiety for some, it might look like irritability for others, it also might look like people pleasing and numbing and getting quiet, right, as a way of coping and managing. And so that's two kind of variations of trauma I heard with you, where the second one sounds like it was ongoing for
Yeah.
years, right? And what do I do, and that impact it has on your psychology, your emotions, like just your relationships. And so I'm wondering, with that, during that phase of life, how did you navigate or manage with all that with home life? Was it just kind of school and distraction, or sports? Like, what, did you have anyone you talked to at the time? Was it kind of like just keep your head down? Like, how did you navigate that?
That's a good question. I tried at the time mostly to find acceptance through or some kind of positivity through friends, just those relationships. We didn't have any kind of therapy. And mostly I just bottled most of it up and kept it
Mm,
secret and just pushed it way down.
mm,
And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't want people to know um,
mm,
that this was going on in my house. Because, like I said, I went to a Christian school, and we were supposedly a Christian family, and so I had the people that I was with in my day to day life. In my mind, their lives were so different, which
mm,
I didn't know that, and they probably had different stuff going on, but I couldn't let them know. So, and that manifested in different ways in sports. That I started smoking pot and drinking when I was 16, but it was just about finding a group that I could belong to. That could have been any group. I got into the music scene a lot. Like, I played guitar, so I was in bands and stuff, which definitely helped the smoking of pot and doing other things. That was just what we did when we were at
mm,
practice. So I kind of went down that, but it's mostly just ignoring it and
mm,
avoiding it in my life. So when I guess that's a good way to kind of get into this part of it. When I was, like I said, I was raised in a Christian home. When I say that, I live in the Bible Belt in the South. It's a lot of Christian homes, but it's really more about the culture and tradition. I draw a
sure.
difference between the Christianity I grew up with and what I call my faith today, because one of them is
Yeah.
about traditions and a list of rules or like
Right.
a framework for ethics, and sometimes a framework for, unfortunately now, I think a framework for politics as well. To me, my faith is about a relationship with Christ and relationship with God, which is, I think,
Mm,
a different thing altogether than religion, so to speak. But around the time I was 17, that's when that came into play for me. So I had a really negative relationship, like a lot of people do, with the Christian faith and religion, because it's like I have been
sure.
really hurt by people who were supposed to be Christians. I have seen that be a domineering thing. And, I could even
Right.
hear my dad say, head of the household, authoritarian
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I'm the way I am because you people are not submitting or doing. And so there was this really toxic element from what I think was an abuse of um, the religion or of scripture. But
Mm,
still, somehow, when I was 17, and it kind of also goes into, I was trying to find acceptance, but I met a couple girls who were Christian. And I actually knew back then, which this is funny that because I see my little brother has done this in rehab. Most girls who also have some kind of insecurity or trauma, if they can save a bad boy, or someone who has trauma, that's a really good manipulation for the guy if he's aware enough to realize, oh, if they know that I have this sob story or that I'm an addict, I can position myself as the boy who needs to be saved. And that's
mm,
how I started this, and did not realize that that those friendships that I ended up getting into, I was going to experience a different side of the Christian faith, which was a relationship with Christ that was
mm,
actually going to heal me.
mm,
So it was pretty gross, my thinking going into it. And then, so I want to say this because it is the answer to how I coped with it. I caught on to this thought of, if you feel like you're worthless, because when you go through trauma, there's a point of view that thinks like it's because there's something fundamentally wrong with me.
mhm.
Cecil didn't stay married to my mom, and he kept doing what he did. Like, maybe I was unlovable. Maybe the fault was
Yeah.
here and
Yeah.
not with him. And when you're young, it's hard to tell yourself the truth. Even as a grown man, and I know that it was his fault, you still
Yeah.
deep down sometimes wonder, or you feel like it was you. And this idea that knows everything about you, everything you were going to do, and created you, um, and loves you fully and knows you fully. I'm like, to be fully known, which is a thing we all want in our life, to be known by somebody. And for when we present our like naked, vulnerable self, to be accepted and to be loved. Like, that's the fear we have. If I show that to somebody and they really know the
Yeah.
worst parts of me, I'm going to get rejected.
Oh, sure. I'm gonna be left. They're gonna, yeah, absolutely. That's the
Yeah.
fear ultimately, is that I'm unlovable, I'll be worthless, they won't be with me, I'll be alone. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's all that fear. Yeah.
So that thought was like, I need that healing so bad. I'm going to explore this further. And my life was hard. I couldn't take it. I couldn't handle anything fake. Like, oh, I'm just going to give you this line, and if that meets your emotional needs because of your trauma, you're just going to buy into it. Like, I tested it for a couple of years, and ultimately, I really found it to be true. It resonated with my spirit, and that has been one of the guiding forces of my life ever since then. So
Mm,
that's my relationship with Jesus. So
mhm.
that is another way I have coped, or I coped then, was finding healing in this, in that relationship. But that's love to me. So
Yeah.
finding healing through love, and it was after that that I did start to open up and talk to people about what had happened to me.
Well, and thanks for sharing that. I think, hearing that for you, your journey of finding, how you said love, like love is in this belief in this, the person of Jesus, right? That in a way I am known and I'm accepted, which is a, big shift from the shame messages of not enough, worthless, no value, not important, unlovable, broken. And that you found some relief, sounds like relief there, some healing, letting go, where some of that self blame from the trauma began to get released. It sounds like some of that kind of energy was being able to kind of be, okay, that's not true. Here's the truth I know about me. And that can kind of, in a way, that shifts my perspective and my inner experience of these events. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? A
Yeah,
good way, a different way of putting it?
definitely.
Yeah. And so that was the beginning, right? And so you kind of been taking this journey from that point on, and then becoming a dad yourself, and kind of flash forward a bit to, like, present day Daniel, and maybe seeing some of that stuff pop up, going back to the reel that you posted recently of like that, the anger, the frustration, the impatience. And so Any connection that you're thinking between the past and the present, if at all?
So when I look back at it, because I've had to do this a lot to try to figure and heal from
Mhm.
things. When I went to Los Angeles when I was 21, and I was a new Christian at the time, and man, I was living free with no responsibilities, and I met my wife, girlfriend at the time, and we were just in love and dating, and there was nothing pressing that trauma in me. It was just living a good life, and having
Yeah.
fun. And I did not know this for years, but when I got married, something shifted in me. So we moved from Los Angeles back to my hometown in Memphis. What shifted is I went from present, living in the moment, like just wanting to be with Rachel and having a good life, to I'm a husband now, and we plan to have kids. I'm going to be a father. Now I have to build this life, and I want to be everything that my father never was.
Mm.
And so that was not a weight I had ever carried before, and didn't realize when I said I do, I stepped into this new weight. And what it did for me, the way that manifested was, my dad was asleep on the couch all the time. He was always on drugs. He didn't work. He wasn't kind. And my mom did all that. She worked. She did all, like, taking us to the practices and buying
Mm.
us things and doing the science fair projects. Like, she did all of it,
Yeah.
including absorbing a lot of his anger so that we didn't have to
Mm.
bear the brunt of it. And I was like, I will not be that way. And so I set out with a tenacity and determination to be a different kind of man. And the first thing that I thought had to be done was providing
Mm.
financially. I thought the emotional provision would just happen because we had been dating. We loved each other. I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
Um, that was just a part of, like, the side effects of being so in love with the emotional care. So
Yeah.
we moved back to Memphis, and I started a business I was self-employed landscape designer, and I started working like 60 hours a week, like just
Mm.
all the time. And I would wake up in the morning at 6 a.m. and I was off. I was thinking about jobs and invoicing and employees and bill. I was thinking about all this stuff. And so even when I was with my wife at that point, I was not present. I was always out there. It was almost like I was present with our future family that I was
Mm.
building. And that started to really affect our relationship slowly over the first couple of years. And we couldn't even pinpoint it because it wasn't like, little t
Yeah.
traumatic at that point. It was just a subtle difference. Like,
Like a 1% I think of, when you're saying that, I'm picturing like a 1%, like a degree off of each other, like two ships, like they're 1 degree off, and it's, you don't notice it, but eventually, sorry, those that are listening have no idea what I'm doing, but those that are watching can see my hands. It's like you kind of
yeah,
drift off, where it's like, within a couple years, now there's a big gap between you two, versus initially it's like you can't even tell. That's what I'm getting. Is that kind of the sense? It's like small, just a degree off.
yes.
It's kind of,
So for her, and I don't want to put too many words in her mouth, what she felt was he used to pursue me as a human, like who I am and my emotions, and he used to love me. He doesn't
mm,
pursue connection with me anymore. He's
mm,
pursuing provision for me. And, so at the end of the night,
yeah,
I would be tired and she'd want to talk. She'd want to connect. Let's have dinner together. The things you do when you're newly married. And I'm
yeah,
like falling asleep, or I'm too tired, or my brain is
mm,
I'm still carrying stress about some client who just texted me or something like that.
mm,
Like, I'm just gone. And over a couple years of this kind of dynamic that was subtle, but she knew
yeah,
something was wrong, and because it's not obvious, it was easy for me to say, why are you putting so much pressure on me? Can't you see I'm providing for us and building our life? How
mm,
dare you be so unsupportive? And in my mind, I thought, oh, she just doesn't understand. One day she's going to thank me for all the good work I did, and she'll see that she was just being needy and immature.
mm.
And I never said that to her. I was maybe a little more loving or kind than that, because I knew that was a load of crap. Like, I knew that in my mind, but somewhere
But you
underneath it
felt,
all,
part of you
that's
felt
really what
that
I was
though.
thinking.
Yeah, you felt that. You were feeling that kind of defensiveness proving, right? You may not have said it, but
Yeah.
that was the inner experience,
Yes,
right?
which lays the groundwork for a bunch of really nasty arguments where my
Uh,
wife wants to come and say, I have a need. Can I talk to you about my need for connection or intimacy?
mm,
And as soon as she says it, me getting defensive and making her feel like the bad guy for bringing that
mm,
stuff up to me, so that now she feels like I cannot talk to my husband about anything. He'll make it about himself, or he'll turn it around on me. And and I wasn't that, it wasn't like I was mean or evil or vindictive. I guess I was
Mm,
working 60 hours a week. I thought it was
mm,
motivated by love. I was too burnt out to understand what I was doing, to have the energy to even engage in that kind of emotional
mm,
depth with her. So I had good intentions. I was just lost. And it,
yeah,
like I said, you can see how it's tied back into this unhealed trauma that I had
sure. Yeah.
growing up. And that was before we had kids that this started coming up. As soon as you have kids, it becomes really obvious. You get
Yeah.
squeezed, and the trauma and your inadequacies and your emotional
Yeah.
problems, they really start just pouring out.
And so that was the foundation, and then kids. And you're right. It's to like, once you have kids, yeah, everything is like 10 times whatever you were experiencing prior. You are tested. Now you're not sleeping. Now you don't, your time is no longer your own, to some degree. And so you're right, it's pressure cooker. So if you want to be tested, have kids. Like, if you really want to put yourself through the ringer, have children. Which I have 3 kids, so I love my children. I wouldn't change it either way, but really it does, it takes all those pains, imperfections. I'm going to call them growth, areas of growth, opportunity, right? The chink in your armor, those things get exposed, every possible weight that you can imagine. And then I'm guessing that's when things start to kind of ooze out more. Yes? Things start to come out a bit more at this point.
Yeah, I mean, imagine my wife in this situation where for the last 2, well, really 3 years, she has not felt pursued or desired,
Mm,
and that is one of her love languages. The words of
okay.
affirmation, physical touch, and she's having to pursue me and often be
Mm,
rejected, and so she's not getting her needs met. She's not getting filled up as a person, and
mm,
then all of a sudden, she has a child who she's emotionally dry because of our dynamic, and now she's being called upon to pour out into this human being. And then because it's when we had our second child that it really started to become something that we're not going to make it if we cannot
mm,
figure this out. And one night I remember she said to me, we have two different memories of this conversation. It's funny, she thinks she was mad, I think she was just sad, but she said, I feel like the entire emotional responsibility of the home and caring for the kids falls onto me. And it did, because I thought, she's got this, I've got that. I had segregated it in my mind. And so that was a new layer of loneliness. There was the lack of connection and intimacy and the loneliness between us. And now she felt like she was alone with raising our children, or at least alone in the emotional responsibility of like owning it. It's like, I helped, I did dishes, I held the babies, I wasn't an absent father. But she knew it was really falling on her, and she was going to
mm,
have to be happy with what she could get from me. And these new layers of loneliness were not sustainable for
mm,
a marriage. And of course, it continued to aggravate things. So, of course, I'm looking at it, and in my good heart and my best self, I'm feeling helpless. Like,
mm,
I thought my wife was always going to feel loved. I thought I was never going to
yeah,
raise my voice. And I was going to be this present father. I
yeah,
am failing at it, even though I'm doing everything I can to be the good man. What
yeah.
is going on? And feeling guilt and shame. But to her, it was always expressed as defensiveness and anger. It got rough.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what, yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's the experience, I think, of a lot of men is that we get stuck, or we can get stuck in this, like, hey, I'm trying to be better than my dad. Like, I'm trying all these things, and I really, and to some degree you are, like, you were different. There was a change. Um and at the same time also being stuck now, and then feeling the defensiveness of trying to prove yourself, like, hey, look what I'm doing, I'm different, I'm better, or the promise you made, or I'm going to be different, I'm not going to yell. And then you find yourself doing it, and then the shame comes up, and then maybe you can feel it with the wife, like, wait a second, like, look what I'm doing. And I'm glad you said that there is this kind of helpless feeling. Not that you said my best self, like, is like there's this true helplessness behind defensiveness and the anger, which is really, I think, the real experience is like that's what's really going on. Now she didn't see that; she sees the defensiveness and the anger rather than that helpless piece. And so it sounds like this might have been an impetus to change too. Of like, was this the point at which you were like, I need to do something different?
Yeah, that's a good conversation. This is what I've been wanting to have with men a lot. So it's really complicated. So we might need to come back and like
Yeah,
dissect this a little
we
bit.
could do the idea. You could do like a bullet point. We could do a second conversation on this, but like, what's the bullet point?
Many in that situation where you're feeling like a failure,
Mm,
the question that rests on almost every man's heart to an extent, whether he's aware of it or not, is, am I enough? We all want
yep.
that, when the weight of the world comes onto me and it's my turn to be a man, can I carry the weight or will I fail?
Oh yeah.
And we will cling desperately to the appearance of being enough, even when we feel like it's falling apart.
Mhm.
This really goes back to not having a father. We call that the father wound, because it's the father who's the first man to address that. So mine didn't. I was carrying that question in. Good morning, buddy.
Hey,
Travis has a
say
little
hi.
one with him.
It's Eli. He's my second. Yeah, come on in, bud. Hi.
I'm wrestling with that question and working to prove that I am. And I
Mm,
was, like I said, working 60 hours a week because I thought this business that I was building was going to provide all these good things. And what I didn't, 'cause it's easy. Let me go back. It's easy for us as men when we're failing at home to find validation and that answer to that question of, am I enough, at
yeah.
work? Because
Oh
there's
yeah.
quantifiable metrics like I make this much money, I
Right.
got this promotion, I get this affirmation or accolade or whatever it is. And so you can almost cling to it because it's a lower hanging fruit to being enough than,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, having a good relationship with your wife and kids. But what I realized is that was insufficient for our life. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did in that moment was we sold a significant portion of my business. Like this gets really practical. It's not so much emotional healing. It's like
Yeah.
we can't sustain what we're doing. And it's like my wife needs me to be more present, just time, like hours spent at home, more
Yeah.
energy at home. And I want to be at home more too. So we had a conversation of how much money do we have to make in
Mm,
order to live and
yeah.
have our bills paid for and not have financial burdens on us. And so we came up with that number. And then we looked at my
Mm,
work and said, how much work do you have to do to meet that need? Or how can we get to that number?
mm,
And it only take 40 hours a week and not 60.
yeah. Yeah.
So that was, I sold part of my business, let go of this thing that I was building that was my whole provision for our family's future, went down to this kind of boutique landscape design business, which is
Mm,
ironic because that's what really has set up my future. So that I could be home more often, and switching
mm-hmm.
from 60 hours a week, being dead, burned out, and exhausted, to a 40-hour a week job that had an income that did provide, just didn't provide a lot extra, changed everything. I had time
Yeah.
for self care. I had time to give her some self care. I had energy just to wrestle with the boys.
Mm,
Um, that it actually took a couple years because I couldn't just walk away from it.
yeah.
Like I was committed to the 60-hour a week thing to give us the money. So we spent a couple years shifting from workaholic, Daniel seeking validation through work, to
Yeah.
my work now serves my family. My
Yeah.
family does not have to be oriented around my work. And that's a
Yeah.
shift that I had to make. That was an important part of it. So once I gained the time, because it's hard to do the spiritual work and the healing work if you can't even think.
Yeah, and I think to your point, and that was a fun little segue. Seeing my son come in and he asked some questions about the life stuff. It was fun. Hey buddy, he's cold, so he's laying on the couch with a
Gotcha.
blanket. Um, yeah, I think that's a real thing of like you're right. I think that's a good point. One, you had this realization that you got to the brass tacks of, hey, what basic changes do we need to make? Because right now it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so you're willing and able to say, okay, like let's shift this. Something inside of you is like, you're right. While you're still not fully healed and working, it's like, okay, that part of you that knew something needed to shift clicked in, say, okay, let's look at this. How do we just afford to live where I have more time? And I think you're right, because at 60 hours at burnout, you can't really care for yourself effectively because there's not enough recovery and restorative time to connect to your family, your wife, your kids, let alone yourself, like actually do your own work, because you need that energy. You need the mental capacity, the emotional capacity. If you're on empty every day, there's nothing left. And so
Right.
we have to get to a place, and I know for some people out there, for some guys right now, you might be in survival mode where you may not have the luxury of stepping back. And I think that's also a real, for some men and women, a real reality, right? Where there isn't a lot of wiggle room right now, but there might be some, like you might be able to create that maybe soon. And for you, you have that ability to step back and do something different, which we need that space to actually do the healing work. Otherwise, and I'm kind of blanket statementing this, otherwise we're just in strict survival mode. So we can't really do a lot of restorative healing work. We're just trying to get through the day and survive to the next moment,
Yeah.
right?
And I think it's different for every family. On my Instagram page, I'll give this kind of message, and I'll have wives say, actually, I'm totally fine nailing down everything from the house, and my husband works 60 hours a week. And I'm like, it's what you said. If your family dynamic supports that and you're not in survival mode and y'all are
Sure.
happy, then I am happy that you are. That's awesome.
Right.
Um,
I would argue, yeah, I'd want to talk to that guy personally and check in with him a bit and say,
right.
hey, let me walk me through your actual routines of the day. What's your formational practices of checking in with yourself, your wife, and family with that? And maybe if he's doing that, like you said, all power to you, man. If that's like restorative, you're right. I'm not gonna if it's working effectively, I'm not gonna argue and say I'm not gonna try and change you. But I'd want to have the real conversation when I hear that too. My radar goes up. I'm like, what's he really doing at 60 hours? But again, he could be doing all those things. So anyway, I know you're laughing because I think you resonated with that one.
Yeah, I do. Because even if you're working 60 hours a week, I'm like, well, you are still present somewhere else and not present with your wife and kids. And I think that's
Right.
the best gift you're going to have in your life. I don't think you'll
Totally.
ever look back at 90 and say, I'm glad I worked all those extra hundreds of thousands of hours instead of building memories with my children. I can't imagine a man saying that. Uh,
Yeah.
so
I can't either. Yeah. So again, until I talk to that guy,
yeah.
I can't fully make a good assessment, but I can. Yeah, I'm with you. I think we're on the same
Well, like
page.
you said, if you only make, and this sounds bad, I really don't mean anything bad by it, but it's a reality. If you have a $20 an hour job and you
Oh
have two
yeah.
kids, you might have to work 60 hours a week, especially depending on where you live.
Right.
And that's a reality. It's like, Daniel and Travis, you guys sound great, but you don't understand. I can't work less than 60 hours a week or we won't be able to eat. And
Right.
I think it's like you said, every man in that position,
Right.
connecting it to your earlier comment, I would say that's fine. Let's look at 3 years down the road. And
Right.
you and your wife talk about what moves
Yeah.
can you guys each make so that in 3 years, because you have
Right.
a 2 and 4 year old now, you're still going to be wanting more time with them when they're 4 and 7 and they're
Right.
still young. So,
Right.
how do you change this? Do you go back to school? Do you work towards self employment? Do you
Yeah.
save? Do you work 60 hours a week for the next 2 years and make a savings that helps you make a different jump?
Right.
Do something to
Yeah.
work towards a better work life balance
Mm-hmm.
that's oriented around your family and not
Right.
around your need to be enough,
Right.
um, or surviving that survival mode phase.
Yeah.
So let me say this about the need to be enough thing, because this is really important. Every man, if you're a father and you're working and you're a husband, I would submit that every man comes to the point where they're not enough.
Mm.
Life has too many demands. Our current culture, where we raise
Right.
kids isolated in our homes and not in a tribe, and we
Mm-hmm.
work the way we work, it's just every man will come to that point. And it's what you do with yourself when you realize I can't be enough for everything that really matters.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I just had to accept that truth. And you can either get
Mm.
prideful and say, oh, I am enough and just be in denial. You can kind of be in pity and say, oh, I'll never be enough and feel sorry for yourself. Or you could continue to pursue, when I get to this milestone, I will be enough. So
Mm.
I'm going to drag my family along with me until we finally get there and they'll finally see.
Yeah.
I just
That's a losing battle right there.
It is. I think if a man realizes this idea of enough is one that I'm placing on myself
Mm.
is unnecessary and unattainable. So
Right.
I did share for me that if I was really going to believe this whole relationship with Jesus thing, it says you are enough. Like that's why I believe in that specific belief system. It's like you don't need to earn grace and love.
Mm.
It's freely given. You just have to
Yeah. Yeah.
accept it.
Right.
And my wife is not perfect. She doesn't have perfect unconditional love, but more than any other human in my life, she has a measure of that for me. I did not need to be enough for Jesus, where I said I was getting validation from. I didn't need to be enough in many ways for my wife that I thought I needed to be. So I just needed to accept, like, look, I'm loved. I'm certainly loved by my children. I don't need to be enough for them. If I loved and adored Cecil, who was an addict, who had multiple affairs, who ended up going to jail for murder, certainly I am loved and adored by my own kids.
Yeah.
And so I let go of this thing. I'm like, you know what? I was not able in the first few years of our marriage to build the business I wanted to build with my skill set and my energy level. I couldn't do it. I didn't do it.
Mm,
So I failed at that. But now we have two kids. We're drowning. I had my time to build that. And since I did not have this skill set or whatever it was to be able to do it, I need to reassess, quit looking to be enough there and say, well, what can I do? I can
mm,
make X amount of money working these hours and be present at home. And that is what I'm doing now. I'm letting
mm,
go of that thing and I'm coming back to this. Later in life, if I want to try to be a bazillionaire and have a huge company and do all these things again, I can do that on the other side of kids if my wife
mhm.
and I feel like it's healthy. But when I have
Yeah.
kids and my wife is drowning in motherhood and all that stuff, like I got to let go of these faulty places to find affirmation and come back home to them.
Mm,
So that's, man, that question of being enough is a really important one for a man to wrestle with and find
mhm.
a healthy way to handle that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, it does, and I think that would be one we should explore it more deeply. I think on a second conversation because there's a lot there, and
Yeah.
just to kind of wrap that piece up and begin to wrap up our conversation today is that you're right that that's a really that's a it's a bottomless pit, and I think a lot of men get stuck in this cycle. And there's been a lot of research talked about this. Brene has got a great book, Brene Brown book on daring greatly, and she has a
Yeah.
whole chapter dedicated to men. Her research on shame and how men often find their worth through production. If I produce enough, if I achieve enough, then I have value enough. If I have this bank account, and that's it, and it's the goalpost just keeps moving. It doesn't ever stop. So once you get there, it's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And that's it. And we also live in a culture in a way that promotes that ideology as well.
Yeah.
Like especially like if you think of a sales job, right? What's if you make sales this year? Well, what do they expect? You got to do more to have this job, and then you got to do more again, and then more again. So it's at least in that type of job, it's constantly pushing you to do more and more and more and more and more, and eventually you have a breaking point. And you got to jump ship and go to a different company. I know guys that do sales. It's like they got to move because eventually the expectation gets too extreme to a point where you can't get there.
Yeah.
And if you buy that in, if that's your identity, you're stuck, man. And that shame message is going to take over, and you're going to be stuck in that endless vicious cycle of shame, and it's going to manifest in a lot of ways. So as we wrap up, there's so many amazing. I just want to thank you just for sharing. But before we totally close out, and there's things that just due to time I couldn't jump into that I would love to jump into with you. But two questions I'm thinking of right now. One, which is this is a total shift, by the
Okay.
way, but an important one, especially someone who was in music in high school and played in bands. What are you spinning right now? Like, what are you listening to? What's speaking to you? What kind of music is getting you moving and grooving?
Uh, uh, that's funny. These days, as an old man, I feel like I'm listening to more like acoustic country bluegrass, bluegrassy kind of stuff. Um, so, like, I like. So it's funny. If you ever listen to a guy named Sturgill Simpson, it's so country.
Okay,
But somehow I think it's nostalgia based. I do still listen to a lot of nostalgic music from the '90s. So that would be like old grunge music and
sure.
stuff. Like the concert I went to this year was the Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
look at that.
we have concerts at the place I work. We also have a concert venue here.
Oh nice, that's awesome.
But yeah, I like Mandolin Orange is one of my favorite bands, the Milk Carton
Okay,
Kids, but they're very kind of
okay,
like indie, low key, acoustic stuff. Very
okay.
calming. Like that. That makes sense that that's what I want in my life as a grown up. Because my
Yeah,
kids are all about the high energy stuff
yeah,
that they hear, and it's always like the Pokemon theme and so much
yeah,
noise.
yeah. No, it's helpful. I'll check him out. So, what was Sturgis? What was that guy?
So
Sturgis.
Sturgill Simpson, if you really want to go
Sturgis
into some
Simpson.
deep country, but if you haven't checked out Mandolin Orange or the Milk Carton Kids, they're especially Mandolin Orange. I put them on a lot. I think they changed their name recently, and I
Okay,
can never remember what they
okay.
changed it to. But
Okay, I'll check it out. No, it's helpful. I always like, for me, because I love music and I always love hearing what is influencing people now. And I agree. I'm in more of I have some loud stuff my kids listen to, but I also do a lot of stuff, kind of acousticy vibe, calming, just like, let me just slow down, I think. But I do get my grunge on and I have moments in the car when I just want to just kind of like listen to some loud stuff and just kind of get energy out. Or if I'm working out or something, I'll do that. I'll do that. And, kind of want to listen to something hard and loud. And because I think when I'm working out, I don't want to listen to something soft because I think I want my blood flowing and moving me to get the stress out. So I definitely put on music differently. But, and where can we find you? If people want to reach your content, I know you said it earlier, but can you share that stuff again? Where to find you on Instagram and everything else to like follow you and get some inspiration and wisdom.
So it's only a couple areas. I didn't know this was going to turn into a thing. It really just started with Instagram. So it's honest_fatherhood. So the Honest Fatherhood Instagram page. I started sharing that stuff to my Facebook page. If someone wants to find me there, that's just Daniel Grose, and
Mm,
you'll see the clips on fatherhood if it comes up. But so there's that. And I recently just started putting my stuff on YouTube. The
mm,
reason is this is a message for fathers. But if you look at the stats, Instagram, the majority of the users are women,
yep.
and that's great. I definitely don't have a problem with women watching my stuff. That's awesome, but it's ultimately for fathers, and YouTube is more male dominated. So I've
Hmm.
just started putting my message there on YouTube. I haven't quite figured YouTube out yet, but it's also Honest Fatherhood
Okay.
with no underscore, just straight Honest Fatherhood on YouTube, and a lot of my same videos will go up there. And that those are the only three places at the moment.
Don't mind my son who's wearing a pirate hat right now in the morning. This is just boy life. So we're in the pirate phase right now. Just turned 5 and everything was pirate themed. So anyway, those that are watching, you get a preview of my life in a minute here. It's a lot of fun though. It's actually totally fun. I get to swing swords around. And well, Daniel, thank you so much. And everyone listening, by the way, all of Daniel's links will be direct in the bio here. If you're watching on YouTube, again, it'll be all direct. I'll link you directly to his YouTube channel, his Instagram account. Those listening, it'll be in the description to click on it. Clickable link take you right there to follow his content. And I think as a guy to guy, dad to dad, I think I'm trying to also generate just, hey, I want to share. It's not about just me what I'm doing or just Daniel, but it's about going to kind of earlier in a way, kind of a community of men and fathers trying to make this change because we need all of us. It's not just about one man, one dad, but about a community of men and fathers showing the difference in how to heal and grow and change and point to other people's work to say, hey, look at all these other men doing the work. And I think that's what we need is a village, right? And even if it's virtual or across the pond in different countries or even in the United States, that we need to kind of point and say, look at all of us trying to do this work and connect, and bridging the gap I think is needed to kind of model that with to the men, to other kids, to moms, all that. So Daniel, I thank you for your time today. And have a great rest of your day. And I thank you so much for just opening up and just being yourself, man. So
Cool.
thank you.
Thank you too, Travis. Have a good one.